Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
When I was around 12 or 13 years old, I stayed up late one weekend with two of my sisters. I have 5 siblings, so our house was usually busy and noisy. It was either a Friday or Saturday night, which meant none of us were worried about getting up early for school the next morning. At first, the evening felt normal. My sisters and I were talking, watching television, and enjoying the extra freedom of being allowed to stay awake. My older brother was stretched out on the couch and had fallen into a deep sleep. My father was still finishing some work before bed. The only thing that felt unusual was my mother. At some point that evening, we noticed she had been crying. She tried to hide it, but it was obvious something had upset her. My sisters and I asked what was wrong. She would not explain. She only said, "This day holds bad memories." That answer made us curious, but we could tell she did not want to talk about it. We assumed it was connected to something private from her past. Maybe someone had died on that date. Maybe something had happened in the family that she did not want to discuss with children. We stopped asking. The words stayed in the back of my mind, though. This day holds bad memories. At the time, I did not understand what she meant. Later, those words would become one of the most disturbing parts of the night. Around 11 o'clock, my father began getting ready for bed. He was putting away his work and checking that everything in the house was secure. Then we heard noises coming from the garage. It sounded as though someone was moving things. There were faint scrapes, taps, and heavier sounds from behind the door. The noises were not constant, but they were clear enough that several of us noticed them. Our first thought was my older brother. He often worked on projects in the garage. He liked taking things apart, building things, and tinkering with tools. It would not have been unusual for him to be out there late, searching for something or finishing an idea. Then we looked toward the couch. He was asleep. He was not pretending to rest or lying there with his eyes partly open. He was completely out. That left the possibility of an animal. Raccoons sometimes entered garages, sheds, and bins looking for food. They could knock over containers or drag objects around. A raccoon trapped inside would make exactly the kind of sounds we were hearing. My father decided to investigate. Because we did not know whether the noise came from an animal or a person, he took a shotgun with him. One of my sisters grabbed a baseball bat. I took a broom. Looking back, the broom would not have offered much protection against a burglar or angry raccoon, but it was the closest thing I could find. The 3 of us approached the garage door. My father opened it first. The garage was completely dark. For a second, we stood at the entrance, listening. The noises had stopped. My father reached for the switch and turned on the light. The room appeared empty. The family car was parked inside. My older brother's projects were spread across the work area, along with tools, parts, boxes, and other things collected over time. Nothing immediately looked disturbed. There was no raccoon hiding beside the bins. No person stood behind the car. No tools were rolling across the floor. My father searched carefully. He looked around the sides of the vehicle and checked the darker corners. We searched behind containers and anywhere a small animal might hide. We did not find anything. The garage door was closed, and there was no obvious sign that an animal had forced its way inside. My father probably decided that the sounds came from objects settling or something shifting naturally. Garages are full of metal, wood, and tools that react to temperature changes. A loose object can slide after sitting still for hours. Something resting against a wall can fall without warning. A small animal may also enter and escape through an opening too narrow for us to notice. After several minutes, my father returned inside. He had work to finish and did not believe there was any danger. My sister and I stayed behind. She had become interested in some of our older brother's projects. Since the lights were on and our father had searched the room, the garage no longer felt dangerous. I began explaining some of the things our brother was working on. I do not remember exactly what the projects were. There may have been mechanical parts, electronics, or pieces of equipment arranged near the workbench. My sister looked over them with mild interest while I told her what I understood. For a short time, everything was normal again. Then I felt as though someone was watching me. The feeling came suddenly. There was no new sound and no voice from behind us. I simply became aware of a presence in the garage. The back of my neck tightened, and I felt an urgent need to turn around. At almost the exact same moment, my sister spun around too. Neither of us told the other to look. We both moved instinctively, raising the objects we were holding. She still had the bat. I held the broom in front of me. We faced the area in front of the parked car. A dark figure was there. I could not see a face, clothes, or any normal details. It appeared only as a silhouette. The shape looked roughly human, but something about its position was wrong. It did not seem to be standing on the floor. It looked as though it was floating slightly above the ground or hanging from something we could not see. The body seemed long and still. It did not wave, step forward, or speak. It only faced us. The garage light was on, so it should have been possible to see more. There should have been color, shadows, or some visible surface reflecting the light. Instead, the figure looked unnaturally dark. It was darker than the wall and the objects around it, like a person's shaped section of shadow placed into a bright room. My sister saw it too. That was clear from the way she reacted. She did not ask what I was looking at. She stared directly toward the same place, holding the bat as though she expected the figure to move. For a second, neither of us spoke. The figure remained in front of the car. The longer I looked, the more its strange position disturbed me. It was too high to be standing normally. Its feet did not appear planted on the floor. The body looked suspended. Then my sister screamed. The instant she did, the silhouette vanished. I did not see it walk away. It did not move behind the car or fade slowly. One moment, the shape was there. The next, the space in front of the car was empty. My sister's scream brought everyone running. My father came back with my mother, and my older brother woke on the couch and rushed into the garage. We tried to explain what we had seen. We told them that a dark figure had been standing or hanging in front of the car. We said it disappeared when my sister screamed. The adults looked around again. There was nobody inside. No intruder was hiding behind the vehicle. Nothing hung from the ceiling. There was no object in front of the car that obviously resembled a person. My parents told us we had probably seen a reflection on one of the car windows. That explanation was reasonable. The garage contained several light sources and reflective surfaces. A person moving near the doorway could create a dark shape on the car. The windows might reflect one of us, a hanging coat, a tool, or something outside the room. If my sister and I moved at the same time, the reflection could disappear instantly. The shape may have seemed suspended because it was visible on glass rather than standing on the floor. At our age, fear and expectation could easily turn a reflection into a human figure. We had already heard unexplained sounds. We had entered carrying weapons. Our bodies were prepared to see a threat. When I suddenly turned, my sister may have copied me. We could both have focused on the same reflection and interpreted it as a person. Then, when she screamed and moved, the angle changed and the image vanished. That may be exactly what happened. But I remember the figure as being in front of the car, not only on the window. It seemed to occupy the room. It had depth. I could see the shape of a body hanging in the open space. My sister remembered it the same way. We did not argue with our parents for long. There was nothing left to show them. The figure was gone, and the garage looked completely normal. Eventually, everyone returned inside. The night continued, but I did not forget what I had seen. For years, I treated the event as a strange childhood experience. It was frightening, but nothing else happened afterward that I could clearly connect to it. We did not repeatedly see the figure in the garage. No one found signs of a person living inside the house. There were no ropes hanging from the ceiling and no footprints around the car. The noises that brought us into the garage could have been ordinary. The silhouette could have been a reflection. That was the explanation I tried to accept. Then, years later, my sister and I learned why our mother had been crying that night. The date held bad memories because it was the anniversary of our great-uncle's death. More than 40 years earlier, he had taken his own life by hanging himself. The family had not spoken openly about it when we were children. Our mother knew the date, and every year it brought back the memory. That alone explained her sadness. What disturbed us was the location. Our great-uncle had died in the same place where we saw the hanging silhouette. The area in front of the car was where his body had been found. I remember the physical chill that came over me when I understood the connection. Until then, the figure had been only a dark shape. Once we learned the family history, its position made terrible sense. It had looked as though it was floating or hanging because that was what had happened there decades before. My sister and I had not known. Our mother never told us before that night. No one had described how our great-uncle died or shown us the exact place. We were too young, and the subject was painful. That meant the image had not come from a story planted in our minds. At least, that is how it seemed. We had seen a suspended figure in the same spot without knowing the history. The coincidence felt too precise. I began replaying the entire evening, my mother crying, her refusal to explain. This day holds bad memories. The noises from the garage around 11, my sleeping brother, the empty search, the feeling of being watched. My sister and I turning at the same time, the black silhouette hanging in front of the car. Then the scream and disappearance. The events suddenly formed a single story. Perhaps the anniversary brought something back. Maybe the noises were the first sign. Perhaps the figure appeared because two children had entered the exact place where a family member died. That was the supernatural explanation, and for a long time, it frightened me. But learning the history may also have changed the memory. Before we knew about our great-uncle, we described the figure as floating or hanging from something. After learning how he died, that part became more important. The connection may have sharpened details that were originally uncertain. Memory is not a recording. Every time we remember an event, we rebuild it. New information can enter the old image without us realizing it. A shadow that looked slightly above the floor might later become a clearly hanging body, because that interpretation now fits. The figure may also have been a reflection from the car. The shape of one of us, distorted across curved glass, could appear long and suspended. The garage light might cast shadows from tools or objects hanging overhead. If something swung slightly when the door opened, both of us could see it move and feel watched. When my sister screamed, one of us shifted, causing the shadow to disappear. Shared misinterpretation remains possible. My sister and I were looking from nearly the same place. We were both frightened by the noises and carrying objects for protection. If the garage contained a human-shaped reflection, both of us would see it. The feeling of being watched may have come from a small sound behind us. I turned first, and she reacted to my movement so quickly that it felt simultaneous. Or she may have turned first, causing me to do the same. Over time, we remembered ourselves spinning together because that made the event feel more powerful. There is no way to test the exact timing now. The figure may even have been our older brother. He had been asleep on the couch when we first checked, but he could have awakened and entered quietly. The garage door connecting to the house may have allowed him to stand near the car and frighten us. When my sister screamed, he could have ducked or moved behind the vehicle. However, he came running with our parents afterward and appeared confused. He never admitted to a prank. There also did not seem to be enough time for him to move from the garage, return to the house, and arrive with everyone without being noticed. One of our parents could have cast a shadow from the doorway while checking on us, but they had gone back inside and only returned after the scream. A reflection from outside is another possibility. Headlights from a passing car could project a human-shaped shadow through a window. A tree branch, post, or object outside might appear across the garage wall or vehicle. As the car passed, the image would vanish suddenly. The noises and our fear made us interpret the moving shadow as a person. That would explain why it appeared only briefly and left no physical evidence. Yet the figure did not seem to move across the room like headlights. It remained still long enough for both of us to stare. It faced us. It seemed aware. That feeling may have come from the shape having something like a head. Human brains are extremely sensitive to faces and bodies. We see people in coats, curtains, shadows, and furniture, because identifying another person quickly is important for survival. A vague oval above a dark vertical form becomes a head and torso. Once the pattern is recognized, the figure seems to look directly at us. The car itself could have produced the whole image. The windshield, mirrors, doors, and hanging seat belts create shapes that change depending on the angle. A dark reflection of the open doorway might look like a tall body. The bumper or lower frame could hide the bottom, creating the impression that it floated. This remains the most reasonable explanation. But the exact location of our great-uncle's death prevents the memory from feeling ordinary. My house is around 100 years old, which used to sound ancient to me. Looking back, I suppose it is not especially old compared with some houses, but it has been standing long enough for several generations of people to live, work, and die around it. The first family known to have lived there were blacksmiths. They kept a forge behind the house, in what is now our back garden. Nothing obvious remains above the ground. Grass covers the area, and if someone visited without knowing the history, they would never guess that people once worked metal there. The remains of the forge are still buried underneath the soil. I sometimes think about how different the property must have looked when that family lived there. The garden would have been a working area filled with smoke, heat, tools, and the sound of hammers striking iron. The house itself was apparently very bare. There was a table, a stove, and some seats, but not much else. It was not decorated or filled with comfortable furniture the way it is now. It seemed to have been used mainly as a place to eat, sleep, and recover before another day of work. I know some of this because my family ended up with old photographs of the house and the people who once lived there. My family used to own a small chain of pubs. One day, an unknown man entered one of them and approached my grandfather. The man handed him an envelope. Inside were old photographs connected to our house and the blacksmith family. This happened around 20 years after that family had moved away. Nobody knew who the man was. He did not resemble any of the people shown in the photographs, and as far as we know, he never explained how he had obtained them or why he wanted my grandfather to have them. He simply delivered the envelope. The photographs gave us a glimpse of the property as it had once been. They showed the family, the old rooms, and the simple way the house was arranged. The envelope should have been an interesting piece of local history. Instead, the mystery surrounding the man made it feel unsettling. Why had he kept the photographs for so long? How had he known that my grandfather's family was connected to the house? Why did he choose to deliver them through one of the pubs rather than sending them directly? Most importantly, who was he? No one ever found out. For years, the photographs remained part of the family's belongings. We sometimes looked at them and talked about the blacksmiths, but nothing in the images seemed openly frightening. There were no mysterious shapes in the windows or ghostly faces in the background. They were simply old pictures of people who had once called our house home. Still, living in the same rooms shown in old photographs gives a place a strange feeling. You begin noticing which walls have remained unchanged. You stand in a doorway and realize that someone stood in the same place a century earlier. The rooms are filled with modern furniture and electricity now, but underneath that, the original structure remains. For most of my life, the house did not feel constantly haunted. There were unusual sounds, but old houses make noise. Floorboards creak, pipes knock, doors shift when the temperature changes. Wood expands and contracts. If the wind is strong, the building seems to breathe. We learn to ignore most of it. However, certain things happened often enough that my family stopped treating every sound as normal. The downstairs bathroom was one of the strangest places. When someone used it, they would sometimes hear footsteps directly outside the door. The footsteps sounded as though a person had walked into the hallway and stopped nearby. The natural response was to assume another family member was waiting to use the bathroom. You might finish, open the door, and expect to find someone standing there. The hallway would be empty. No one would admit walking past. This happened to more than one person. There were also sounds of chairs moving. A scrape would travel across the floor, as if someone had pulled out a heavy dining chair or pushed one back toward the table. Sometimes the sound came when no one was downstairs. Other times, people were in separate rooms and all heard it. When someone checked, the chairs appeared normal. It was easy to blame the floor or furniture settling. A chair leg could shift slightly on an uneven surface. A dog might bump into one. Sound could travel from a neighboring room and resemble wood scraping. We accepted those possibilities. The house had never done anything dangerous. The noises were strange, but they did not feel like a reason to leave. Then, a few months ago, something happened while I was home alone. My brother was staying at his girlfriend's house. My parents had gone to visit friends. The dogs were around, but there were no other people inside. I was upstairs watching a video on YouTube. It was an ordinary evening. I was relaxed and not thinking about the house's history, the photographs, or any of the strange sounds we sometimes heard. Then a loud banging came from downstairs. It was violent enough to make me stop the video immediately. At first, I remained still and listened. The banging was not a single object falling. There were multiple impacts. Something seemed to be crashing around in the lower part of the house. My first thought was that someone had broken in. Then, I tried to calm myself. I told myself it was probably the dogs. They sometimes became excited when they wanted to go outside or come back in. They could scratch at a door, jump against something, or knock objects over. Maybe they were trying to get into the house. The explanations sounded possible, but the noise did not feel right. It was too loud. It sounded like several heavy objects being thrown rather than animals scratching or moving around. I stayed upstairs for a few moments, trying to decide whether to investigate. Part of me wanted to lock myself in the bedroom and call my parents. Another part felt ridiculous for being frightened by noise in my own house. If the dogs had caused a mess, someone would need to check whether they were injured. I paused the video and moved toward the stairs. The house had become quiet. That silence was almost worse than the banging. If the dogs were excited, I expected barking, whining, or movement. I could not hear any of that. I went downstairs carefully. As I approached the kitchen, I could already see that something was wrong. The lights in the backyard were on. We had not left them on. Their glow came through the windows and made the garden visible beyond the glass. The buried forge lay somewhere beneath that illuminated grass. Inside the kitchen, the cupboard containing the pots and pans was open. Everything that had been stored inside had been thrown around the room. Metal pots lay across the floor. Pans had landed at different angles. Some objects were near the cupboards, but others had traveled much farther, as though they had been deliberately pulled out and thrown. That was the banging I had heard. For a few seconds, I could not move. I looked for the dogs, expecting to find one of them standing among the mess. They were not responsible. There was no way they could have opened the cupboard and scattered every pot and pan like that. Even if one had managed to pull the door open, the contents would have fallen in a pile directly beneath it. They would not have been spread around the kitchen. I began thinking about a burglar again. Someone could have entered downstairs while I was watching the video and started searching through cupboards. Maybe they heard me moving upstairs and escaped before I came down. I checked the door. We had 3 locks. All of them were still secured. There was also a heavy-duty chain across the door. The chain made a distinctive rattling sound whenever the door opened or moved. It was impossible to handle quietly. The chain was still attached. The locks showed no sign of damage. No one had entered through that door. I checked the other possible entrances. Nothing appeared broken. The windows were closed. There was no shattered glass, forced lock, or obvious route someone could have used. Even if an intruder had somehow entered, they could not have left through the chained door and secured it from the inside afterward. I was still alone. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by scattered metal and the strange light coming from the backyard. I did not want to remain downstairs. The room felt occupied, even though I could see no one. I began imagining someone standing just beyond the windows. The backyard lights had not switched themselves on for no reason. Perhaps whoever had thrown the pans was outside now, watching through the glass. I looked toward the garden. I could see the grass and parts of the property, but no person was visible. The darkness beyond the lights was too deep to search properly. Anything standing outside their reach would remain hidden. I called my family. I do not remember every word I said. I was frightened and probably speaking too quickly. I told them about the noise, the kitchen, and the locked door. They believed me. That mattered because they had experienced their own unexplained things in the house. They had heard the footsteps outside the bathroom. They knew the sound of chairs moving when no one was near them. They did not automatically assume I had knocked everything over myself or invented the incident. When they returned, we examined the kitchen more carefully. There was still no evidence of a break-in. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. The disturbance seemed focused on the cupboard and the backyard lights. A burglar searching for money or electronics would have no reason to empty pots and pans across the kitchen. A prankster would need access to the house and a way to leave without touching the locks or chain. No one outside the family should have had that access. One possibility is that the cupboard failed. If a shelf collapsed, the pots and pans could fall suddenly and create a series of loud impacts. The cupboard door might open under the pressure, allowing everything inside to spill onto the floor. Metal objects can bounce and roll farther than expected, especially when they strike one another. That could make a simple collapse look violent. This is one of the most reasonable explanations. The house is old. Shelves weaken. Screws loosen. Wood warps. A cupboard that appears stable can fail without warning. But I do not remember seeing a broken shelf. Nothing obvious inside the cupboard explained why the contents had come out. The pans also seemed too widely spread. A collapse should have created a concentrated pile near the cupboard. Instead, the kitchen looked as though someone had taken each item and thrown it in a different direction. The dogs are another possible explanation. One of them may have entered the kitchen, smelled food inside the cupboard, and pushed at the door. Once the pots began falling, the animal could have panicked and run through the room, kicking or scattering them farther. That might explain the wide distribution. The noise could have frightened the dogs enough that they left the area before I arrived. However, the cupboard was not an easy one for them to open. There was also no food stored inside that would normally attract them. None of the dogs appeared injured or especially frightened afterward. The backyard lights might have been unrelated. Someone could have switched them on earlier and forgotten. I might not have noticed until the kitchen incident made me more alert. A timer, sensor, wiring problem, or brief electrical fault could also activate them. Old electrical systems behave unpredictably. The coincidence of the lights and the pots made the event feel deliberate, but they may have had separate causes. Perhaps a power surge affected the lights and caused an appliance or vibration that disturbed the cupboard. A heavy vehicle passing nearby could shake an old house enough to move unstable objects. I do not remember feeling the building shake, but the metal crashing would have covered smaller sounds. There may also have been an animal larger than our pets. A rat, fox, or other creature could enter through a gap too small for a person. It might climb into a cupboard, become trapped, and cause chaos while escaping. An animal moving among pots would create loud banging. By the time I reached the kitchen, it could have disappeared through the same opening. But we found no droppings, fur, damaged packaging, or hole. An animal powerful enough to throw heavy pans around should have left some evidence. The locked room aspect is what makes the event difficult. Something physical happened. The pots and pans moved. The lights came on. There was no question of a dream or hallucination because the mess remained after my family returned. The cause had to be inside the house or part of the house itself. Yet no person should have been able to enter or leave. I began thinking about the footsteps and moving chairs differently after that. Before, they were only sounds. Sounds can be misidentified. The kitchen incident involved visible movement. If the same thing that caused the footsteps had become stronger, perhaps it was now capable of moving objects. That is the frightening interpretation. The house's history naturally entered my thoughts, too. The first family had worked with metal. The forge behind the house would have been filled with iron tools, pots, chains, and the repeated sound of hammering. Now, a century later, metal objects had been violently thrown around our kitchen while the lights above the old forge site came on. It is easy to create a supernatural connection from those details. Perhaps something connected to the blacksmith family remained on the property. Maybe the buried forge still mattered to whoever had lived there. The pots and pans could represent metalwork. The banging might echo the hammering that once happened outside. But that is only a story created after the event. There is no proof the blacksmiths experienced tragedy in the house or that any of them died there. We do not know whether they believed the property was haunted. Old photographs do not automatically imply ghosts. The mysterious man who delivered them may also have had an ordinary explanation. He could have been a collector, local historian, distant relative, or former neighbor. Perhaps he found the envelope while clearing another property and traced the house to my family. He may have been shy, in a hurry, or unwilling to explain his connection. The fact that he did not resemble the people in the pictures means very little. He could have been born decades later. Still, the lack of identity makes the photographs feel as though the house itself arranged for them to return. They were separated from the property for 20 years, then carried into one of my family's pubs by someone no one recognized. Now they remain with us, documenting the first people who occupied the rooms. Sometimes I wonder whether the man had experienced something connected to the house. Maybe he wanted to remove the photographs from his possession. Perhaps he believed they belonged with the current owners. There is no way to know. My family never saw him again. The bathroom footsteps continue to bother me because they sound so ordinary. They are not dramatic chains, voices, or screams. They sound like a person walking past a closed door. That is exactly what makes them convincing. When you hear them, you do not initially think ghost. You think a family member is outside. Only after opening the door and finding no one do you question it. The same is true of the chairs. This happened about 15 years ago, when I was living in a flat in a quiet part of town. The area was not completely isolated, but it was peaceful enough that unusual people or sounds tended to stand out. The path leading toward our building did not connect to many other places. If someone walked along it, there was a good chance they were heading toward the flats. One afternoon, I was walking home when I noticed a man behind me. He was far enough away that I could not see his face or clothing clearly. I only noticed that he was moving in the same direction as me. At first, I did not think much about it. People sometimes take the same route, and there was no reason to assume he was following me. I continued walking at my normal pace. When I reached the flat, the man was still some distance behind. I went inside before I could see where he eventually went. He might have entered another flat, turned around, or continued somewhere I did not know about. Although there was not much else along the path, it was still possible that he had a normal reason to be there. The moment seemed too unimportant to remember. Later, however, I would think about that man repeatedly. That night, I locked my bedroom door before going to sleep. My room had a simple lock that used a single key. I kept that key with me inside the bedroom, so once the door was locked, none of my flatmates should have been able to enter. I had no particular reason to feel unsafe. Locking the bedroom was simply part of my normal routine. Sometime during the night, I woke suddenly. The clock showed exactly 3 a.m. I had the strong impression that something had just been thrown across the room. The sound reminded me of a pillow hitting the floor or wall. It was soft, but heavy enough to wake me, like fabric filled with something landing nearby. I sat up and looked around. The room was dark, and I could not immediately see anything out of place. My pillows seemed to be where they should have been. Nothing obvious lay on the floor. The door was still closed. I listened for footsteps or movement outside. There was nothing. Because I had been asleep, I could not be certain the sound had really happened. It might have been part of a dream or a normal noise from elsewhere in the flat that my half-awake mind interpreted as something inside the room. I checked the time again, settled back down, and eventually went to sleep. The next night, it happened again. I woke abruptly at exactly 3 a.m. Once more, I felt certain that the sound of a pillow being thrown had pulled me out of sleep. There was a soft impact somewhere in the bedroom, followed by silence. I turned on a light and checked the room more carefully. Nothing appeared to have moved. The door remained locked. The key was still inside with me. I began wondering whether one of my pillows had slipped while I was sleeping, though I could not find one on the floor. Maybe I had moved suddenly and struck the mattress or wall with my arm. Old buildings also make noises at night. Pipes shift. Floorboards settle. Neighbors drop things. A sound traveling through a wall can seem as though it came from only a few feet away. The fact that I woke at 3 again was strange, but it could have been coincidence. My body may also have started waking at that time out of habit. Once a person notices a particular hour, they become more likely to remember waking then. On the third night, the same thing happened. Exactly 3 a.m. The same soft, forceful sound. The same immediate feeling that something had been thrown through the darkness. By then, I was properly unsettled. I checked the lock before going to sleep each night. I made sure the door shut fully and turned the key myself. No one else had access to it. There was no way for a flatmate to quietly enter, throw something, and leave without unlocking the door from the inside. The window was another possible entry point, but it was not somewhere a person could easily reach without being seen or making noise. There was also no sign that anyone had touched it. I began searching the room each morning. I looked beneath the bed, behind furniture, and inside the wardrobe. I checked whether any loose object could fall during the night. Nothing explained the sound. The fourth night was the same. Then the fifth. Then the sixth. For 6 consecutive nights, I woke dead on 3 in the morning. Each time, I believed a pillow had just been thrown across the room. I never actually saw one moving. That detail is important. I would wake after the sound, not before it. I was always coming out of sleep, disoriented, and trying to understand what had happened. It is entirely possible that there was no object moving at all. The sound may have existed only in the moment between dreaming and waking. Some people experience sudden imaginary noises as they fall asleep or wake. They hear bangs, crashes, footsteps, voices, or doors slamming even though nothing physical caused them. At the time, I did not know much about sleep disturbances. I only knew that the same event was happening at the same hour every night. The repetition made it feel intentional. I began wondering whether the man I had seen on the path had followed me to the building. Maybe he had watched which flat I entered. Perhaps he had found a way inside and was moving around while everyone slept. But that did not fit the locked bedroom. Even if a stranger entered the flat, he could not get through my door without forcing it or using another key. I would have noticed damage. There was also no proof that the man had even approached the building. He might have been an ordinary neighbor. Connecting him to the noises may have been my mind trying to create an explanation. I did not tell myself the flat was haunted. I was only a little creeped out. Nothing had touched me, and nothing in the room had visibly changed. A strange noise at night was not enough to make me leave. After the 6th night, the disturbances stopped. I slept through 3 in the morning without waking. The following nights were normal too. About a week passed. The fear began fading. I assumed the episode had been caused by stress, poor sleep, or some repeated noise from the building that had since stopped. Maybe a neighbor had been working unusual hours and dropping something each night. Perhaps heating or plumbing equipment activated at 3 and produced a soft bang. Once it stopped, there seemed no reason to keep thinking about it. Then, one day, I returned home and found the front door open. Not slightly loose in the frame. Open, I stopped outside and looked into the flat. Nothing immediately appeared damaged. I did not hear movement from inside, but an open front door was still wrong. I entered carefully and found one of my flatmates. I asked whether they had left it open. They said no. According to them, they had locked it after coming inside. Then they added that perhaps it had not closed properly. That was possible. A door can look shut without the latch catching. A draft, vibration, or slight movement can push it open later. It could have been an ordinary mistake. Still, I felt uneasy. The memory of waking at 3 returned immediately. I went toward my bedroom. The door was closed. I unlocked or opened it, expecting the room to look the way I had left it. Instead, almost everything had been moved. The furniture had been rotated 180 degrees. The room seemed reversed. Pieces that had faced one direction now faced the opposite way. It was not as though a chair had been nudged or a table moved slightly for cleaning. Someone had deliberately turned the furniture around. My smaller possessions had been collected and piled in the center of the room. Objects from around the bedroom had been taken from their usual places and stacked together. The bed, furniture, and scattered belongings had all been rearranged while I was away. I stood in the doorway trying to understand what I was seeing. It was too much work to be accidental. A person would have needed time. Furniture does not rotate by itself. Objects from different parts of a room do not gather into a pile because of a draft, vibration, or plumbing problem. Someone had entered. That was the first thought that made sense. But the door had been locked when I left. I kept the only key I knew about. There was no sign that the lock had been broken. If one of my flatmates had done it as a joke, they would have needed access to the room and enough time to move everything. The prank would also have been extreme. Turning all the furniture and piling up my property was not a quick joke. It would have required effort and planning. I questioned the people I lived with. No one admitted doing it. Perhaps they were lying. A group prank is one of the most reasonable explanations. A flatmate could have copied the key without telling me, or discovered another way to unlock the door. Someone may have wanted to frighten me after hearing about the 3 o'clock noises, but I do not remember telling everyone enough for them to build a prank around it. Even if they knew, moving an entire room while leaving the door apparently secure was far beyond what I expected from them. The open front door made the situation more serious. If it had not latched properly, an outsider could have entered. The person may have gone through the flat while no one was paying attention and found a way into my room. Locks are not always as secure as people believe. A simple bedroom lock can sometimes be opened with basic tools, another key, or something thin inserted near the latch. A determined intruder might enter without leaving obvious damage. The man from the path came back into my mind. What if he had followed me home that first afternoon? Maybe he had watched the building over the following nights. Perhaps the sounds at 3 were attempts to frighten me, test whether I was awake, or make me believe someone was in the bedroom. But how could he have caused those sounds through a locked door? Maybe he had already entered before I locked it and hidden somewhere inside. I had searched the room, but a person can hide in places someone checks poorly, especially if that person does not truly expect to find anyone. That possibility was terrifying. For 6 nights, I might have slept while someone concealed themselves nearby. They could have thrown a pillow, waited for me to wake, then remained silent. But there were serious problems with that theory. The room was not large enough for someone to live hidden inside for 6 consecutive nights without being discovered. They would need food, water, and a way to leave. I would have noticed signs. The bedroom door was locked from the inside while I slept, so an intruder would be trapped with me unless they had another exit. There was no evidence that happened. A person outside the room could have produced the sound through the wall or door. They might throw something in the neighboring room at exactly 3, making it seem like the impact came from my bedroom. If the walls were thin, I could easily misjudge the direction. One of my flatmates might have stayed awake and done it as a joke. The fact that it happened at the same precise time suggests a scheduled source. An appliance, pipe, neighbor, or person could cause a repeated sound at 3 each morning. My half-asleep brain may have turned it into the image of a pillow flying across the room. That is probably the simplest explanation for the 6 nights. The rearranged bedroom may have been a separate event. A flatmate's prank or a burglary could have happened a week later, and fear connected the two. Human beings naturally build patterns from frightening experiences. First, I noticed a stranger on the path. Then I woke repeatedly at 3. Then I found the front door open. Finally, my room had been rearranged. Placed together, the events looked like a progression. Someone followed me. They entered at night. They tested me for 6 days. Then they returned and changed the room. But each event may have had its own ordinary cause. The man was walking to another flat. The sounds were caused by the building or sleep hallucinations. The front door failed to latch. My flatmates moved the furniture as a prank. That combination is possible. Yet the final scene made the earlier nights impossible for me to ignore. When I looked at the reversed room, I felt as though whatever had been waking me wanted to prove it could enter. For 6 nights, I heard movement, but found nothing. Then, the disturbances stopped. A week later, the whole room had changed while I was gone. The pile in the center looked deliberate. It was not vandalism in the normal sense. Nothing was simply smashed or stolen, at least not that I remember. The purpose appeared to be showing control. Someone wanted me to know they had been inside. The furniture being rotated made the room feel familiar and wrong at the same time. A bed or desk facing the opposite direction changes how a space feels immediately. The doorway, windows, and corners are all seen from unfamiliar angles. It was my bedroom, but it no longer felt like mine. I did not stay another night. I did not wait for the person to return or for the 3 o'clock sounds to begin again. Whether the cause was a cruel flatmate, a stranger, or something I could not explain, the room no longer felt safe. I left. Looking back, I think a human explanation is more likely than anything supernatural. The rearrangement required physical effort. A person moved those objects. The question is who? One of my flatmates could have had a duplicate key. Landlords and property managers often retain keys to rented rooms, even when tenants believe they hold the only copy. A former tenant might also have kept one. Someone connected to the building could have entered without forcing the lock. The front door being open may indicate that a person with access had recently left in a hurry or failed to close it. The furniture could have been moved by the landlord, maintenance staff, or another resident for reasons that were never explained. But why pile my belongings in the center? Why rotate everything rather than move only what was necessary? There had been no warning about repairs or inspections. No one claimed responsibility. A landlord entering secretly would already be serious, but the way the room was arranged suggested intimidation rather than maintenance. The flatmates remain obvious suspects. They lived close enough to observe my routines and knew when I would be away. They could work together to move heavy furniture. They could also keep denying it because my frightened reaction made the prank successful. People sometimes continue jokes much longer than expected once they realize admitting the truth will make them look cruel. Maybe years later, one of them would confess. At the time, however, I had no reason to trust that explanation. If they were willing to enter my locked room and move everything, I did not feel safe living with them either. The man on the path may have had no connection. I only saw him once and never identified him. It is possible he lived nearby or was visiting someone in the building. The fact that there was little else down the path made his direction seem strange, but he may have turned before reaching the flats after I went inside. I did not see him attempt to enter. I did not see him again. Fear gave him a role in the story because he was the only unknown person I remembered from before the disturbances. Still, I cannot completely dismiss him. If he had been watching me, he would know where I lived. The open front door later showed that access to the flat was possible. The room's lock may have been easy to bypass. Someone interested in frightening or stalking me could have entered while I was away and rearranged the space. The exact purpose would remain unclear. Nothing valuable being stolen might suggest the person was not a normal burglar. They may have wanted to frighten me or prove they could reach me. That possibility makes leaving immediately seem like the correct decision. The 6 nights at 3 could also have been connected psychologically rather than physically. Maybe I had subconsciously noticed the man following me and felt unsafe afterward. That anxiety disrupted my sleep. I woke at the same time because the body often repeats sleeping patterns once they begin. The imagined pillow sound may have been a hypnopompic hallucination, an intense sound created while waking. After several nights, I expected it, which made another episode more likely. Then the episode stopped naturally. A week later, a real intruder or prankster rearranged the room. The two events became connected in memory because both involve feeling watched and unsafe. This explanation allows the night sounds to be internal while treating the final incident as real. It is plausible. But there is one detail I still find difficult. Why 3 in the morning exactly for 6 nights? People often say they woke at exactly 3 when they actually saw times like 2:57, 3:03, or 3:10 and remembered them as the same hour. My memory may have simplified it. I might have checked a digital clock that was only accurate to the nearest minute and seen slightly different times. The repetition could feel more exact now than it was. Even so, it happened often enough that I noticed a pattern while it was still occurring. The pillow sound is equally uncertain. I never confirmed that a pillow moved. I did not wake to find one across the room. The impression was simply strong enough that I swore that was what I heard. Perhaps a cushion in another flat hit a wall each night. Maybe someone returned from work at that hour and threw a bag onto a bed. The same routine could produce the same sound through shared walls. No mystery would be required. But after seeing my entire room reversed, those explanations stopped feeling reassuring. A repeated sound in darkness is easy to dismiss when the room looks normal in daylight. Once the furniture had moved, I could no longer tell myself the space was untouched. Someone had crossed the boundary of the locked door. Even if the nightly sounds were unrelated, the danger was real. I sometimes wonder whether the person entered more than once. Maybe they had been inside during the 6 nights, but did not move anything obvious. Perhaps the sound came from them dropping or throwing a pillow while I slept. They may have stood in a dark corner and watched me wake. Then they left through a route I never discovered. That idea requires hidden access to the room, which seems unlikely, but old flats can contain strange features. A connecting door covered by furniture, an accessible window, a loose ceiling panel, or a shared storage space could allow entry. I never conducted a detailed investigation because I left so quickly. There may have been a simple structural explanation I never found. Part of me regrets not involving the police or documenting the room. Photographs might have shown exactly how everything was positioned. Fingerprints or damage to the lock could have supported an intruder theory. Neighbors might have seen someone entering the building. A landlord could have confirmed whether duplicate keys existed. At the time, I was focused only on leaving. I did not want to spend another evening inside while waiting to find out whether someone would return. The fact that nothing was apparently stolen may have made authorities less interested, but unauthorized entry and deliberate rearrangement were still serious. I wish I had treated it as possible stalking rather than only something strange. If a person had targeted me, they might have moved on to someone else. Then again, perhaps reporting it would have revealed that a flatmate had organized the whole thing. An ordinary explanation might have ended the fear. Instead, the uncertainty remained. I never experienced anything similar after leaving. No one followed me to another home. I stopped waking at 3 to the sound of a pillow moving. My furniture remained where I left it. That strongly suggests the cause was connected to the flat or the people living there, not something attached to me. If it had been paranormal, it did not follow. If it had been a stalker, they either lost interest or did not know where I moved. If it was a prank, leaving ended it. I still think that walking away was the safest choice. The experience has stayed with me because it developed so quietly. There was no dramatic attack. The man behind me never ran or threatened me. The sounds at night were soft. The front door might only have failed to close. Each individual event was easy to dismiss. Then I opened the bedroom door and saw that someone had physically transformed the room. All the earlier uncertainty became threatening at once. I picture the man on the path sometimes. He was too far away to identify, walking in the direction of the flats where there was little else to visit. I reached home before him and never saw whether he came inside. Maybe he turned away and had nothing to do with anything. Maybe he had already noticed me. I also picture those 6 nights, the sudden waking, the clock showing 3, the soft impact in the darkness, me turning on the light and finding no proof. Then, the week of silence. It almost felt like a pause before the final event. I came home. The front door was open. My flatmate said it had been locked, but might not have closed properly. I went to my bedroom. The furniture faced the wrong direction. My belongings sat in a pile in the center of the floor. The locked room had been entered and rearranged without an explanation. I never stayed another night because I understood one thing clearly. Whether it was a stranger, someone I lived with, or something I still cannot explain, whatever had access to my bedroom knew exactly how to make sure I would notice.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was around 9 or 10 years old, some of my cousins came to visit us from Colorado. We lived far out in the middle of nowhere, so having family stay with us was a big deal. There were not many other children nearby, and visits gave us someone new to play with besides our brothers and sisters. One of my cousins was close to my age. At some point during the visit, I told him I wanted to show him some toys I kept in the basement. The basement was not a place I enjoyed entering alone. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. It was part storage area, part computer room, and part general space for things that did not fit upstairs. But the layout made it frightening to me as a child. The light switch was located at the bottom of the staircase instead of at the top. That meant anyone going down had to enter the dark basement before they could turn the lights on. The stairs were also open on one side. As you descended, you slowly gained a view of the basement beside and below you. There was no enclosed stairwell protecting you from the darkness. You could see into the room before reaching the switch, and anything standing down there could see you coming. Normally, I handled this by running. I would stand at the top, build up enough courage, then rush down the stairs and hit the switch as quickly as possible. I did not stop halfway or look into the basement. I knew there was probably nothing down there, but knowing that did not make the darkness feel harmless. On that day, however, my cousin was with me. I did not want him to think I was afraid. At 9 or 10 years old, looking brave in front of another kid mattered. I did not want to sprint down the steps or admit that the basement made me nervous. So instead of making my usual mad dash, I tried to act calm. I started walking down slowly. My cousin followed behind or beside me. The basement was completely dark except for a faint glow coming from somewhere ahead. At first, I assumed the light came from the computer. As we moved lower, more of the room became visible. The computer was on. Its screen cast a weak light across the desk and nearby furniture. That was strange by itself because no one was supposed to be downstairs. Everyone in the house was upstairs with the visiting family. But what frightened me was the office chair in front of the computer. Someone was sitting in it. The figure was dark because the overhead lights were still off. The glow from the monitor was not strong enough to reveal a face or clothing. All I could see was the shape of a person seated in the chair. For a second, I thought it might be one of our dads. Maybe an adult had come downstairs before us and was using the computer without turning on the light. But I had just come from upstairs. As far as I knew, everyone was there. My cousin saw the person too. Neither of us had time to ask who it was. As we continued down far enough to see into the room, the figure turned in the chair. It looked toward us. I could not see eyes or a face. I only saw the head and upper body rotate in our direction. That movement was enough. My cousin and I turned and ran up the stairs as fast as we could. Any attempt I had made to look brave disappeared immediately. We pushed past each other, grabbing at the railing and climbing toward the light upstairs. I do not remember whether the figure stood up or followed us. I did not look back. I expected to hear footsteps on the stairs behind us. I imagined a hand reaching through the open side and grabbing one of us before we reached the top. Nothing touched us. We ran into the room where our fathers and the rest of the family were gathered. Both of us were frightened and talking at once. We told them someone was sitting at the computer in the basement. We explained that the lights were off, the computer was on, and a dark figure had turned to look at us. The adults did not believe us. Everyone was upstairs. No family member admitted using the computer. There was also no normal entrance into the house through the basement. Someone could not simply open an exterior door downstairs and walk in. As far as the adults were concerned, there was no way for an unknown person to be sitting there. They probably believed we had frightened each other. Two children entered a dark basement, saw the office chair and computer equipment, and mistook the shadows for a person. Once one of us ran, the other followed. That would have been the obvious explanation. One or more adults may have gone downstairs to check. I do not remember the search clearly. What I remember is that no one was found. The basement was empty. There was no stranger hiding behind furniture or in a storage area. The chair may not even have been positioned the way we remembered by the time the adults looked. Nothing was missing, and there were no signs that anyone had entered. The experience became one strange childhood memory. For years, I thought of it as the only possibly paranormal thing that ever happened in that house. We did not have repeated sightings of dark figures. There were no voices calling our names or objects flying across rooms. The basement did not develop a reputation for being haunted. Nothing similar happened to me there again. That made it easier to dismiss. Maybe the chair had been turned partly sideways, and the high back looked like a person's body. A coat, blanket, or pile of clothing might have been draped over it. The glow from the monitor could have created a head-shaped shadow. As we moved down the stairs, our angle changed, making the figure appear to turn. A computer's screensaver could have shifted from a dark image to a brighter one, changing the shadow on the chair at exactly the wrong moment. Children often see human shapes in random objects, especially in darkness. Our brains are designed to recognize faces and bodies quickly. That ability protects us, but it also causes mistakes. A coat on a chair becomes a seated man. A lamp and curtain become a person standing by a window. In a basement I already feared, my mind may have been ready to see someone. My cousin's presence does not completely rule that out. We were looking at the same group of objects from nearly the same position. If the chair and shadows resembled a person, both of us could have made the same mistake. One child may have gasped or moved first, causing the other to interpret the shape the same way. Memory can also become shared through retelling. Maybe I said, "Someone sitting there," and my cousin accepted it before seeing clearly. By the time we reached the adults, both of us believed the figure had turned toward us. That is a reasonable explanation. But I remember the movement. It did not feel like a shadow changing as we walked. The figure appeared to notice us. It turned because we had reached the point where it could see us on the stairs. That sense of awareness was what made us run. For a long time, I treated the incident as something unexplained, but probably harmless. Then I remembered another event from the same period. Our house was isolated, but we still experienced disturbing incidents involving real people. Someone tried to break into the property more than once. There was also a peeping Tom. My sister saw a man looking through her bedroom window. That alone was frightening. We lived far from busy roads and crowded neighborhoods, so a stranger had no innocent reason to be standing outside a child's window. The isolation that usually made the property feel private also meant someone could move around without being noticed by neighbors. For years, I remembered the peeping Tom as a separate incident. Then, while thinking about the basement story, something suddenly connected in my mind. My cousins had been visiting when my sister saw the man outside her window. It happened during that same trip. That realization gave me chills. If a stranger was moving around the property while family was visiting, maybe the figure in the basement had not been paranormal. Maybe someone had entered the house. The adults believed there was no way to access the basement from outside, but old or isolated homes are not always as secure as people think. There may have been a window, crawl space, utility opening, or door that a determined person could use. Even if the basement had no obvious entrance, someone could have entered through the main floor earlier and hidden downstairs. With so many visiting family members, it might have been easier for a stranger to move unnoticed. Doors could be left unlocked. People came in and out. Adults assumed unfamiliar sounds came from guests. A person hiding in the basement might remain there while everyone gathered upstairs. That possibility is more frightening to me than a ghost. If the figure was human, it was sitting in the darkness watching the computer while a house full of people remained only one floor above. When my cousin and I appeared on the stairs, it turned toward us. It did not call out or identify itself. It did not turn on the lights. It simply watched us run. Maybe the person left while we were telling our parents. The adults may have spent several minutes dismissing the story before anyone checked. That would have given the intruder time to hide or escape through the same route used to enter. The basement may have contained enough furniture, boxes, or storage areas to conceal someone during a quick family search. No one expected to find a real stranger. They may have looked around briefly, laughed at us, and returned upstairs. A person hiding behind something could have waited until the house became quiet. The peeping Tom incident suggests someone was at least willing to approach the house and watch the people inside. Could it have been the same man? There is no proof. The events happening during the same visit might be coincidence. I do not remember the exact day or whether they occurred only hours apart. Childhood memories often compress several days into one period. The peeping Tom may have appeared before or after the basement sighting, even if both happened while my cousins were staying. But the connection is possible. Maybe the man watched the house from outside, saw many people arrive, and became curious. Perhaps he entered through an unsecured window. He could have used the computer or only sat near it because the screen provided light. Then 2 children came down and surprised him. If he was the kind of person who looked through my sister's window, there is no way to know what he wanted. He may have been a burglar searching for valuables. He may have been watching children. He may have had no clear plan at all. The idea that my cousin and I came within a few steps of a real intruder makes the memory much worse. We were walking slowly because I wanted to look brave. If we had continued toward the switch instead of running, we would have entered the room with him. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs. To turn it on, one of us would have needed to move even closer to the office chair. We had no phone, weapon, or adult nearby. The open staircase left us fully visible. The figure may have been waiting to see what we would do. Running immediately could have protected us. But the human explanation also has problems. Why was the computer on? If a stranger had entered secretly, turning on a computer would create light that could reveal their presence. The machine might have already been running, of course. Someone in the family could have left it on. The figure may have chosen the chair because it was available, not because they were using the computer. Why did the adults find no evidence? A person sitting in the chair would likely disturb dust, move objects, or leave a door or window unsecured. But families do not usually examine a room for forensic evidence after children report seeing a shadow. Small signs could easily be missed. The figure also may not have been human at all. The timing of the peeping Tom might make me reinterpret an unrelated visual mistake. Once I remembered a real stranger had been near the house, my mind connected the two because the connection created a complete story. People naturally search for patterns. 2 frightening memories from the same trip feel related even when they may have different causes. The peeping Tom could have been one person outside. The basement figure could have been a chair and shadows. There is no need for them to be connected. That is probably the safest conclusion. I have also wondered whether the peeping Tom was ever identified. If the family caught or recognized him, maybe he could be ruled out as the basement figure. I do not remember an arrest or explanation. My sister only saw a man looking through her window. He disappeared before anyone could stop him. If he was never found, the possibility remains open. The isolated location made incidents like that especially unsettling. People often imagine that living in the country is safer because fewer strangers pass by. But isolation can work both ways. There are fewer witnesses. A person can park farther away and approach through fields or trees. They can watch a house without neighbors noticing. If someone wanted to break in or look through windows, our property may have offered privacy. We already knew people had tried to enter before. The adults may have believed the basement was secure, but someone determined enough might find a weakness they did not know existed. The phrase, "there was no way in," depends on the family knowing every possible route. Old houses sometimes have coal chutes, drainage openings, basement windows, or loose panels. A child may not know about them. Even an adult may overlook a damaged lock or opening hidden behind bushes. Maybe the figure entered through another part of the house while a door was temporarily open. Visiting relatives create confusion. A stranger could even pretend to belong there for a few moments if the family was large enough. That seems unlikely, but not impossible. There is another possibility. And perhaps one of the adults had been downstairs shortly before us and left the computer running. The chair may still have been rotating slowly after they stood up. When we reached the point where we could see into the basement, the chair turned because of momentum. A coat or dark shape on it looked like a person. That would explain the movement perfectly. An office chair can rotate with very little force. If it was slightly unbalanced or the floor sloped, it could turn on its own. The computer light behind it would create a dark outline. From the stairs, we might see the back of the chair as shoulders and a head. Then the chair rotated and appeared to look at us. This may be the most reasonable physical explanation. It accounts for why no person was found and why both of us saw the same movement. The figure was real in the sense that a chair and objects created it, but it was not alive. The problem is that I remember a head turning separately from the chair. That may be memory adding detail. At 9 or 10, I did not stand there analyzing which parts moved. I saw something human-shaped react, then ran. Over years, the brief movement became a clear person turning to look. I cannot be certain the original image was as detailed as it feels now. The basement darkness also affected depth. The bright computer screen may have reduced our ability to see anything around it. When looking toward a light source, nearby dark objects become silhouettes. A person-shaped shadow could appear solid, even if it was made from several objects at different distances. The monitor image may have changed, causing the silhouette to shift. Our eyes were still adjusting after leaving the bright upstairs room. For the first few seconds in darkness, vision is unreliable. I had also entered expecting to be afraid. I was deliberately walking slowly while fighting the urge to run. My body was already tense. The first unexpected shape would have triggered panic. My cousin probably sensed my fear even though I tried to hide it. If I stopped suddenly, he would stop too. If I ran, he would run. This does not mean he did not see the figure. It means our reactions were not independent in the way two adults observing calmly might be. Still, I remember looking at him afterward and knowing he had seen something. He did not only run because I screamed. We both reacted to the movement. When we told our fathers, our descriptions matched. That shared memory has kept me from dismissing the entire incident. If I could speak to my cousin now, I would ask him to describe it without hearing my version first. Does he remember the computer being on? Does he remember a person in the chair? Did the figure turn? Does he connect it to the peeping Tom? His answers might show whether our memories remained similar or separated over time. He may not remember it at all. For me, the event became tied to my fear of the basement, so it stayed vivid. For him, it may have been one strange moment during a childhood visit. Even if he remembers the same thing, two children can share a mistaken perception. But confirmation would matter emotionally. I also wonder what my sister remembers about the man at her window. Did he look old or young? Was he wearing dark clothing? Did she see him clearly enough to describe his face? Was her window near an area that could lead to the basement? Did the adults search the property immediately? If the incidents happened on the same night, a connection would seem stronger. If they occurred days apart, it would remain possible, but less direct. At the time, no one appears to have linked them. The adults treated the basement sighting as children imagining a person. The peeping Tom was treated as a separate security problem. Only years later did I place them beside each other. That delay makes me cautious. A connection discovered later can feel meaningful because the mind wants it to be. There is no proof the figure and the man were the same person. But there is also no proof they were not. I no longer think of the incident as automatically paranormal. In some ways, a ghost is not even the most likely explanation. The possibilities range from harmless to terrifying. A rotating office chair and computer shadow. A coat arranged in a human shape. A visual mistake shared by two frightened children. A family member who moved before we reached the basement. A prank, or a real intruder sitting silently in the dark. The last possibility is the one that gives me chills. Not because it explains every detail perfectly, but because our property had already attracted people who tried to break in or watch through windows. There was a known human threat around that house. A man looking through my sister's bedroom window was not imagination. Someone had been close enough to see inside. If that person entered the basement, my cousin and I may have interrupted him. Perhaps he did not chase us, because the house was full of adults. He only needed to remain quiet and escape before anyone believed us. The family's disbelief could have helped him. We ran upstairs, shouting that someone was downstairs. Instead of immediately surrounding the house or calling police, the adults may have spent time telling us nobody could be there. Those minutes would be enough. A stranger could slip through a window, hide in another room, or leave through a door while everyone focused on calming us. By the time they searched, he was gone. That scenario is possible, but I do not know whether it happened. I do not want to turn an unclear childhood sighting into a definite attempted kidnapping or break-in. We never saw a weapon. The figure did not approach us. There was no evidence of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The safest statement is that two children saw what looked like a person sitting at a computer in a dark basement. The figure turned toward them. When adults checked, no person was found. The peeping Tom occurred during the same family visit, which may or may not have been connected. That is all I can honestly claim. Nothing else paranormal happened in that house. The basement never produced another figure. The computer did not turn on by itself again, at least not that I remember. No one heard voices from downstairs. If the event had been supernatural, it was a single appearance without any wider pattern. That makes a human or visual explanation more likely. But isolated experiences can be difficult precisely because there is no pattern. If something happens once, there is no chance to prepare equipment, compare conditions, or gather evidence. You have only a few seconds of fear and whatever memory remains afterward. I still picture the staircase, the bright room upstairs behind us, the darkness below, me pretending not to be frightened because my cousin was watching, the slow descent instead of my usual run. Then the computer glow revealing the office chair, a dark body sitting there, the head turning, both of us running. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had followed my normal habit. If I had sprinted down the stairs alone, I might have reached the switch before noticing the figure. The basement lights would have come on. Maybe I would have seen an empty chair with a coat on it and laughed. Or I might have found a real man sitting only a few feet away. Because my cousin was there, I walked slowly enough to see into the room before reaching the bottom. Trying to look brave may have given us time to notice the danger. That thought has always stayed with me. We did not turn on the light. We did not go closer. We ran. Years later, when I remembered the man outside my sister's window during the same trip, the memory changed. The figure no longer seemed like a vague ghost in a childhood basement. It became a possible person. Someone who may have been watching the house. Someone who may have entered while the adults were distracted. Someone sitting in the dark, using the glow of our computer, who turned when two children appeared on the stairs. There may be no connection at all. I hope there is not. I would rather believe we saw a chair turn in the shifting light. But whenever I imagine the figure now, I no longer wonder whether it was a ghost. I wonder whether it was the same man who later stood outside my sister's bedroom window. And I wonder how long he had already been inside our house before we found him. I was asleep when a strange buzzing sound woke me. At first, I thought it was some kind of insect flying around my bedroom. The noise was faint but persistent, passing close enough to my head that I could not ignore it. I opened my eyes and listened. The room was quiet except for the buzzing. It moved from one side of the room to the other, then seemed to stop. A few seconds later, it started again. I got out of bed and searched for whatever was making it. I checked near the lamp, around the ceiling, and beside the furniture. I looked behind anything large enough for an insect to hide. I could not find it. Whenever I thought I knew where the sound came from, it seemed to move. The buzzing would grow louder, then fade before I reached the spot. Eventually, I gave up. It was annoying, but I assumed a fly, bee, or other insect had entered through the window and would either leave or become easier to find later. I returned to what I was doing, but the sound continued for hours. It was never constant enough for me to track properly. Sometimes several minutes passed in silence, and then the buzzing returned without warning. By then, I was fully awake and becoming frustrated. I began searching the room again. This time, I went toward the window and pulled back the curtains. A bee was behind them. It was clinging to the glass or the fabric near the window, though I cannot remember exactly which surface it was on. What mattered was that I had finally found the source of the noise. I felt relieved. A bee inside the room was unpleasant, but it was also normal. It could have flown through an open window or entered when someone opened a door. I did not want to kill it. I tried to scare it away from the curtain and guide it toward the window. I waved something near it and made movements that should have caused it to fly. The bee did not react. It remained in the same place. I moved closer and tried again. Still nothing. It seemed alive because I had heard it buzzing, but now it looked weak or confused. Its body barely moved. I became cautious. I did not want to touch it and get stung. I kept trying to make it leave without placing my hand too close. No matter what I did, it would not fly away. Then, after several minutes, it simply fell. It dropped from the curtain or window and landed on the floor. It was dead. The change happened so quickly that I stared at it for a moment, expecting it to begin moving again. It did not. The bee that had spent hours buzzing around my room had died without any clear injury. I thought that was strange. But insects die inside houses all the time. A bee can become exhausted while trying to escape through a closed window. It repeatedly flies into the glass, uses up its energy, and eventually falls. It may also enter a home after exposure to pesticide or illness. The bee could have been dying before I ever found it. That explanation made sense. Then another bee appeared. It landed on the outside or inside of my window shortly afterward. I noticed it almost immediately because I was already paying attention to the area. I tried to scare this one away too. Before I could do much, it died. It seemed to collapse almost as soon as it landed. That was when the situation began feeling wrong. One dead bee could be random. Two dying in almost the same place within minutes was more difficult to dismiss. There could have been pesticide on the window or curtains. Maybe the building had recently been treated for insects, and the bees were being poisoned when they landed. A cleaning product could also have left a harmful chemical on the glass. I did not know. I was hungry, and I decided to leave the room and eat breakfast. I expected to return later and clean up the bees once I felt less uneasy. When I came back to the bedroom, I found another dead bee on the floor. This one looked different. It had been smashed. The body was flattened and damaged in a way that did not look like a bee simply falling and dying. It looked as though someone had stepped on it or crushed it with a hard object. I immediately thought of my pets. We had 2 cats and 1 dog. Animals sometimes chase insects. A cat might slap a bee with its paw or bite it. A dog could step on one without noticing. But all of our pets were small. I did not believe any of them could have crushed the bee so completely. More importantly, I was home alone and did not remember any of the animals being in the bedroom while I was eating. Even if one had entered, I would expect the bee to be torn, bitten, or moved around, not flattened neatly against the floor. I looked around for signs that one of the pets had been playing there. Nothing else seemed disturbed. The dead bee lay by itself. I became too frightened to pick it up. I did not want the cats or dog to eat it and possibly get stung or become sick, so I placed a shoe over the body. That way, the pets could not reach it, and I would not have to look at it until my mother came home. Covering it gave me some relief. I knew exactly where that bee was. It could not move, disappear, or be dragged away without the shoe shifting. I went to the bathroom. I was gone only a short time. When I returned, there was another dead bee on the floor. It was also smashed. The shoe remained where I had left it over the first one. This new bee lay nearby in another part of the room. For a few seconds, I stood in the doorway and did not enter. There had not been enough time for another bee to fly in, die, and somehow become crushed without making any sound. I had not heard buzzing from the bathroom. I had not heard an animal moving in the bedroom. I was still alone. I checked the pets again. None of them appeared frightened or interested in the room. The cats were not crouched near the floor watching insects. The dog was not barking or sniffing around. They behaved normally. The second smashed bee had simply appeared. By then, I no longer wanted to stay in the bedroom. I moved into the living room and waited for my mother to return. I stood there instead of sitting comfortably because I was too nervous. Every small, buzzing noise from outside made me look toward the hallway. I imagined more bees gathering behind the curtains or crawling from a crack in the wall. I also worried that there might be a hive hidden somewhere in the building. If bees were entering the room one after another, there could be dozens inside the walls. But that still would not explain why they looked crushed. A bee falling from a wall or ceiling might injure itself, but it would not normally be flattened. I tried to find another explanation. Perhaps the bodies were not actually smashed. A bee curls or changes shape after death, and the wings may spread or break. From a distance, it can look more damaged than it is. Maybe I had mistaken natural decomposition or injury for crushing. But I had seen insects before. These bees looked as though pressure had been applied to them. I kept waiting. I did not return to the bedroom alone. When my mother finally came home, I told her everything. I explained the buzzing, the first bee behind the curtains, and the second one that died as soon as it landed on the window. Then I told her about the bees on the floor. I said I had covered one with a shoe and found another after leaving the room for only a few minutes. She probably thought there was a simple pest problem. That was the most likely explanation. Together, we went toward the bedroom to clean everything. I stayed close behind her. When we entered, there were more dead bees, not 1 or 2. Around 10 additional bees had appeared. They were scattered across the room. All of them looked smashed. The shoe was still covering the first body, exactly where I had placed it. The other bees had appeared around the room while I waited in the living room. I had not heard them buzzing. I had not heard the pets chasing them. No one had entered the house. The number made the scene much more disturbing. A single bee could come through a window. Several bees might indicate a nearby hive. But 10 bodies appearing in a short time suggested something larger. The strange part was their condition. They were not crawling weakly near the window. They were not lying intact with their legs curled underneath them. They looked crushed. It was as though someone had killed them before placing them around the room. My mother and I cleaned them up. I do not remember whether we counted the exact number, but there were roughly 10 new bodies in addition to the earlier ones. We checked the window, curtains, floor, and nearby walls. There was no obvious opening where a swarm could enter. We did not see a living bee flying around. The buzzing had stopped. The room was quiet. I began asking neighbors and other people in the building whether they knew of any hives nearby. No one was aware of one. No one else had experienced bees entering their flat. That made the event feel limited to my bedroom. If a colony lived inside the building, I expected other residents to notice insects near their windows, vents, or walls. Bees do not usually choose one room without leaving any sign elsewhere. Still, the lack of reports did not prove there was no hive. A colony can exist inside a wall for a long time before anyone notices. A small opening near one apartment may become the main route in and out. The bees might have entered only my room because it was closest to the nest. The building may also have treated part of the structure with pesticide without informing everyone. Poisoned bees could emerge from a hidden cavity and die soon afterward. That would explain why several appeared in a short period. It might even explain the damaged bodies. If they crawled through a narrow opening, their wings and bodies could be crushed against wood, brick, or metal. They could fall to the floor already injured. Perhaps I called them smashed because they looked unusually damaged. This is one of the most reasonable explanations. A hidden colony may have been exposed to insecticide. The bees attempted to escape through gaps near my room, became weak, and died. The first one still had enough energy to buzz for hours. The second died as soon as it reached the window. The others emerged later and fell before I saw them alive. If some were stepped on accidentally by my pets, that could account for the flattened bodies. Even small cats can crush an insect with a paw. A dog does not need to be large to step on a bee. The animals may have entered while I was eating or in the bathroom, killed the insects quickly, and left before I returned. Cats can hunt silently. They do not always remain beside what they kill. One cat could swat several bees, crushing or damaging them without making enough noise for me to notice from another room. That explanation covers much of what happened. But it does not fit how quickly the final group appeared. I had been waiting in the living room for my mother. I do not remember hearing any pets repeatedly entering the bedroom. When we returned, around 10 bees were already dead. For cats to kill all of them, the room would have needed to fill with living bees first. There should have been buzzing, chasing, or movement. The animals might also have been stung. None showed signs of pain. A swarm of 10 bees is not enormous, but it should create noticeable activity in a quiet room. Another possibility is that the bees had been there all along. The floor, carpet, or room lighting may have hidden them. Fear can narrow attention. When I found the first smashed bee, I focused on it and placed the shoe over it. I may not have scanned the entire room carefully. The second bee might also have been present before I went to the bathroom. I only noticed it after returning because I was expecting another one. Later, when my mother entered and turned on more lights or helped search, we discovered bodies that had already been there for hours. In that case, the bees did not appear from nowhere. I simply found them gradually. This is very possible. Bedrooms contain shadows beneath beds, furniture, and curtains. A small, dark insect can blend into flooring. If all the bees entered during the night or early morning, they might have died before I woke. The buzzing bee behind the curtain could have been the last living member of the group. I assumed the others appeared later because I discovered them one at a time. The bodies may have looked crushed because they had dried, curled, or been stepped on without anyone noticing. That explanation is ordinary, but I remember the floor being clear before I left. I remember looking around because I wanted to know where the bees came from. The later bodies seemed too visible to have been missed. Memory can change, though. The shock of seeing 10 bees may have made me certain they were new. There is no photograph showing the room before and after. I only have my recollection. The buzzing itself could have come from more than one bee. I thought I was tracking a single insect, but several may have been moving behind the curtains or inside the wall. The sound continued for hours because different bees became active at different times. When I finally found one, I assumed it was the only source. The others may have already been weak and hidden. Temperature also affects bees. If the room was cold, they might become slow and unable to fly. As sunlight warmed the window, they could briefly become active, then die from exhaustion or exposure. A group trapped indoors often gathers near light and gradually falls to the floor. That is common with flies and other insects. The strange appearance of the bodies remains the only part that does not fit comfortably. I wish I had examined them more carefully. At the time, I was too frightened. I did not want to touch them or look closely enough to determine whether they had actually been crushed. My fear may have turned broken wings and curled bodies into something more violent. A dead bee lying on its side can appear flattened, especially if its abdomen has collapsed. Some may have been dead long enough to dry out. If my mother had inspected them, she might have offered a normal explanation, but I do not remember her saying anything definite. We simply cleaned them up. Another explanation involves a bird, lizard, spider, or other predator. Some animals kill bees and leave the bodies behind. A large spider near the curtains could catch insects, drain or crush them, and drop the remains onto the floor. That might explain why the bodies appeared damaged and why no living bees remained. But 10 bees in minutes would be too much for one spider. A bird entering the room would be obvious. A lizard or insect-eating animal might move quietly, but it would probably eat the bees rather than leave them scattered. There may also have been a ventilation fan or mechanical opening that damaged the insects. Bees entering through a vent could be struck by rotating parts, then dropped into the room. The bodies would appear crushed before they reached the floor. If the fan turned on and off automatically, several could fall within a short period. I do not remember a vent above the area, but it is possible. A narrow window mechanism might also trap and crush bees when opened or closed. Perhaps the bodies fell from inside the curtain folds whenever air moved them. That could create the impression that new bees appeared after I left. The first live bee may have been part of a larger group trapped in the curtain. When I shook or disturbed it, dead bees hidden in the fabric could have fallen gradually. This explanation fits surprisingly well. Curtains have folds where insects can remain unnoticed. If a colony or swarm had passed near the window, several bees could enter and become trapped between the curtain and glass. Some died and remained caught in the fabric. When I pulled the curtain, waved at the living bee, or moved around the room, the dead ones loosened. They may have fallen one by one over the next several minutes. Their bodies could have been damaged by being trapped against the window. The later group of 10 might have dropped while I waited in the living room, especially if the curtain was still moving from air or heat. I do not know whether the bodies were concentrated near the window. If they were, that would support this idea. My memory places them around the room, but fear may have exaggerated the distance. The possibility of pesticide remains strong, too. Someone might have sprayed outside the building without neighbors knowing. Bees exposed to poison often behave strangely, become unable to fly, and die suddenly. The first bee refusing to move fits poisoning. The second dying immediately after landing fits it too. A larger group could have reached the room already dying. The damaged appearance might result from neurological spasms or falls. If a nest existed nearby, many affected bees could emerge at once. The fact that no one else saw them may simply mean my room was closest to their entrance. I asked residents whether they knew of any hive, but most people do not notice nests hidden in roofs or walls. A colony can occupy a cavity without producing an obvious hanging hive. The bees may have moved on or been removed shortly afterward, which would explain why the event did not continue. I never found a definite source. There were no more large groups as far as I remember. No one discovered a nest near the window. No neighbor came forward with the same problem. The event ended almost as suddenly as it began. That is part of why it stayed with me. If bees had continued appearing for days, the cause would probably have been found. A pest control worker could inspect the building, locate the hive, and explain how the insects entered. Instead, everything happened within a short period. A buzzing sound woke me. One bee died behind the curtain. A second died at the window. Then dead, damaged bees began appearing on the floor. By the time my mother returned, there were around 10 more. After they were cleaned, the problem seemed to disappear. There was no time to understand the pattern. Because I was alone during the beginning, I also doubted myself. I wondered whether I had somehow caused it. Maybe I sprayed something earlier without remembering. Perhaps a cleaning chemical on the window killed them. Did I accidentally step on one and then become convinced no one could have crushed it? Did the pets kill more while I was not watching? Fear made every possibility feel suspicious. The shoe over the first bee became an important detail in my memory. I placed it there because I wanted control. I did not want the body to move or the animals to touch it. When I returned and found another smashed bee while the shoe remained still, it felt like proof that something new had happened. The first body was contained. Yet another had appeared. Then, the number increased while I stayed away from the room. It felt as though the bedroom was producing them whenever I left. I know that is not how reality works. Bees came from somewhere. They entered through an opening, were carried in, or had already been hidden. Their deaths had a physical cause. I do not believe insects can simply appear from nothing. But standing in the doorway and seeing another body made ordinary logic difficult to hold on to. The room felt unsafe in a way that had nothing to do with being stung. The bees were dead. They could not attack me. What frightened me was the unseen process. Something was happening inside the bedroom when I was not there. Bodies were being left behind. I could not hear or see how. When 10 more appeared, it felt deliberate. Even though there was no reason for anyone to place dead bees in my room, a person could have done it as a prank. But I was home alone. No one entered. The front door remained secure. My mother had not returned yet. A neighbor would have no access to the bedroom. The pets could not collect 10 bees from outside and arrange them silently. A human prank seems less likely than a hidden hive. Still, the way they looked crushed made me imagine someone standing in the room, killing them one by one while I waited nearby. That image was irrational, but fear does not need a complete explanation. It only needs something unexplained. I still wonder whether there was an opening behind the curtains that I failed to notice. A small gap around the window frame could allow bees from inside the wall to enter. If the colony had been disturbed or poisoned, many might come through at once. Some could become trapped between the glass and fabric. They would fall over time, already weak or dead. The entire experience could be explained by one hidden structural problem. That is what I prefer to believe. But I also remember checking with other people in the building. No one knew of any hive. No one else had bees in their rooms. The problem seemed to begin and end with me. Maybe that was only chance. My window could have been the nearest exit. The other residents may not have paid attention, or may have found one or two insects without considering them unusual. A group of bees entering one flat is uncommon, but not impossible. The event does not need to be paranormal to be frightening. A concealed nest inside a building can be dangerous, especially with pets and children nearby. Poisoned insects may indicate chemicals in the environment. The absence of a clear cause does not mean there was no natural one. I know that. Still, whenever I remember that morning, the details return in the same order. The buzzing that would not stop. The bee behind the curtain refusing to move, its body falling without warning. The second bee landing and dying almost immediately, the first smashed body on the bedroom floor. The shoe placed over it. The trip to the bathroom. Another crushed bee waiting when I returned. Then the long wait in the living room, too afraid to enter alone. My mother finally arriving. The two of us walking back into the bedroom. Around 10 more dead bees spread across the floor. No buzzing, no movement, no explanation. Maybe they had been hidden in the curtains and fallen. Maybe my pets killed them. Maybe pesticide from a nest inside the walls caused them to die and collapse. Those are all reasonable. One of them is probably true. But I have never understood why they all seemed smashed, or how so many appeared within minutes while no living bees were flying around. I only know that when the morning began, I was searching for one insect. By the time my mother came home, the room looked as though something unseen had been killing them while I waited outside. I grew up in the Midwest, and hiking was something my friends and I did often. It was not unusual for us to choose a trail without planning much in advance, spend a few hours outside, and return before dark. We knew the local woods well enough to understand the ordinary risks. Ticks were everywhere in summer. Snakes sometimes rested near rocks or crossed narrow paths. The heat could become dangerous if you did not bring enough water, and the ground near rivers was often steeper and less stable than it looked. Most of the time, those were the only things we had to worry about. One summer day, my best friend and I decided to visit a trail that led toward a small canyon with a river running through it. The main trail did not continue directly to the water. Reaching the river required leaving the easier route and making your way down through the woods, over steep ground and across rocks. People had traveled through the area before, but it was not a clearly marked path. Because it was the middle of summer, we decided not to go all the way down. The grass and undergrowth were thick enough to hide ticks and snakes, and the climb back would have been uncomfortable in the heat. Instead, we planned to walk to the overlook above the canyon. From there, we could see the river and the opposite side without entering the heavier vegetation. The walk was normal. The air was warm, the trees were full, and insects made the constant background noise that comes with summer in Missouri. We talked while we walked, and did not feel as though we were entering somewhere dangerous. The overlook had a railing along the edge. Beyond it, the ground dropped toward the river. Across the canyon, the woods rose again on the other side. The distance was wide enough that anything among those trees should have felt separate from us. We reached the railing and looked across. That was when I noticed something sitting in a tree. The tree was extremely tall. I do not know what kind it was, but it stood above many of the trees around it and had no leaves. Its bare branches stretched out against the sky, making anything on them easier to see. At first, I thought the shape was a very large monkey. That was the closest familiar comparison my mind could produce. It was dark, heavy-looking, and crouched on one of the branches. I could clearly see that it had legs beneath it rather than being a nest, bundle of leaves, or broken section of the tree. My first thought was almost funny. What was a monkey doing in the middle of nowhere in Missouri? There were no wild monkeys anywhere near us. An escaped exotic animal was possible, but the chance of finding one sitting in a tall, dead tree across a canyon seemed ridiculous. I kept staring. The longer I looked, the less it resembled a monkey. Something extended down its back. At first, I thought it might be loose fur, a second branch, or part of the tree behind it. Then I realized the shapes looked like wings. They were long and folded close to the body, hanging down the creature's back. I did not say anything to my friend. I wanted to ask whether she saw it, but I could not make myself speak. The idea that saying it aloud would make it more real sounds irrational now, but that is exactly how I felt. As long as neither of us acknowledged it, I could continue pretending I had mistaken a branch or shadow for something alive. If I pointed and said, "What is that?" then we would both have to accept that something unusual was sitting across from us. I looked at my friend instead. She had become quiet. She moved closer to the railing. Her attention was fixed on the same tree. I knew she had seen it. She did not need to point or say anything. Her body language changed completely. She leaned forward as though trying to understand the shape, taking small steps closer to the edge to improve her view. I wanted to pull her away. The creature remained crouched on the branch. It did not flap its wings or move toward us. It did not make a sound that I heard. It simply stayed there. From that distance, I could not see a face, eyes, feathers, or skin. I could only see the overall shape. It had a body large enough to look human-sized or larger. It had visible legs. It was balanced in a crouch. The long wings rested along its back. The fact that it was not moving somehow made it worse. An ordinary bird would shift its feet, turn its head, or adjust its feathers. A large animal would react to its surroundings. This thing seemed frozen. I began worrying that it would look toward us. The canyon created a feeling of safety because of the distance, but I could not tell how far the creature could see. If it had wings large enough to reach down its back, the river and steep ground between us might not protect us at all. It could cross the canyon much faster than we could return to the car. I tried to persuade my friend to leave without telling her why. I said it was getting dark. I said we should start back before we lost the light. The sun was not gone yet, but the woods would become darker quickly once evening began. That was a reasonable excuse, and I repeated it more than once. Come on, we should get back. We don't want to be walking through the woods when it gets dark. She did not respond immediately. She continued staring at the tree. I could tell she was having the same problem I was. She wanted to understand what she saw, but she also did not want to acknowledge it. I kept looking between her and the creature. Every second felt like too long. I imagined it lifting its head. I imagined the wings opening. I imagined it dropping from the branch and gliding directly toward the overlook. Nothing happened. Finally, my friend said, "Yeah, let's go." Her answer came suddenly, as though she had reached the same limit I had. We turned away from the railing and started back toward the trail. Neither of us ran. Running would have meant admitting there was something to run from. It might also have attracted attention. Instead, we walked quickly. It was more than a normal pace, but not quite a sprint. I wanted to look back, but I was afraid of what I might see. If the branch was empty, I would wonder where the creature had gone. If it remained there, I would know it was still watching. If it was in the air, I did not know what we could do. The trail to the car passed through enough trees that the overlook disappeared behind us quickly. Once the canyon was out of sight, I listened for movement above the branches. I expected a rush of air, the snapping of limbs, or some heavy impact in the woods. I heard only ordinary summer sounds. Our footsteps, insects, leaves moving. Neither of us spoke. That silence was unusual. Normally, we would have laughed about becoming frightened or immediately debated what we had seen. Instead, we kept walking. I think both of us were afraid that the other person had not seen the same thing. If I described a winged figure and my friend said she had only noticed a large bird, I would feel foolish. If she had seen nothing at all, I would have to question my own mind. It was easier to wait. We reached the car and got inside. The doors closed, and for the first time since leaving the overlook, I felt protected. Even then, we did not discuss it. We drove away from the trail. I watched the trees through the windows, but nothing followed us. The creature did not appear above the road or in another field. The trip ended normally. We returned to my friend's house. Only after we were safely inside did I finally begin talking about what happened. I said, so there was something in that tree, and before I could finish, she interrupted me. It had wings. That was the moment the experience became real. I had not told her what I thought I saw. I had not used the word bird, monkey, creature, or wings while we were at the overlook. She had independently noticed the same detail. The long shapes down the thing's back were not something I created afterward. My friend had seen them too. We began comparing what we remembered. Both of us had noticed the large, dark figure crouching on the branch. Both of us thought it had legs. Both of us saw long wings folded down its back. Neither of us could identify it. We also admitted that we had each avoided speaking because we were frightened. She had moved closer to the railing to get a better look. I had tried to make us leave before the creature noticed us. The shared account made it harder to dismiss as a simple mistake, but it did not prove that the figure was anything impossible. We had been standing beside each other, looking from nearly the same angle. If a group of branches created an unusual shape, both of us would see the same illusion. If a large bird was perched in the tree, we could both misunderstand its body and wings. The distance also made details unreliable. We could see the outline clearly enough to recognize a crouched form, but not clearly enough to identify feathers, a face, or exact proportions. A large bird is the most obvious explanation. Missouri has several birds with impressive wingspans. Herons, eagles, vultures, and cranes can appear much larger than expected, especially when perched high in a bare tree. A great blue heron has long legs and large folded wings. When crouched, its neck can bend in a way that changes its silhouette completely. A turkey vulture can sit hunched with its wings hanging low, especially if drying them or adjusting its position. A bald eagle can look heavy and almost mammal-like from a distance. The bare tree would make any large bird stand out dramatically. We may have expected to see a normal bird shape, small body, visible head, wings at the sides. Instead, we saw one from an unusual angle. If the bird faced away from us with its head lowered, it could resemble a crouched primate. Its folded wings might extend down the back like the shapes we saw. That explanation is reasonable. However, the figure did not look like any bird either of us recognized. It seemed to have clear legs bent beneath it in a human or monkey-like crouch. Its body appeared broader than a heron. The wings looked long, but did not create the usual feathered outline. At the time, neither of us thought, that is a large bird. We both thought it was something else. Distance can create that mistake. Without a reliable object beside the creature, we could not judge its size. The tree was tall, but we did not know how thick the branch was or how far behind it the body sat. A medium-sized bird could appear enormous against an empty sky. The creature might have been closer to us than the main tree, perched on a branch from another tree that overlapped visually. That would make its size and position difficult to understand. The long wings might also have been branches behind the body. Two dark limbs descending at similar angles could appear attached to the creature's back. Because we were already trying to interpret the central shape, our minds may have connected separate pieces into one animal. This is a common visual effect. The brain prefers complete forms. A shadow becomes a torso. Branches become legs. A darker section becomes wings. Once we recognized the creature, every surrounding shape became part of it. The fact that both of us saw wings does not rule that out. We shared the same view and the same arrangement of branches. Another possibility is that it was a person. Someone could have climbed the tree wearing dark clothing and carrying fabric equipment or a large backpack. Hunters sometimes use tree stands or camouflage that breaks up the human outline. A person with a coat or folded tarp behind them might appear to have wings. But the tree was extremely tall, and the figure was positioned on a branch where climbing would have been dangerous. There was no obvious reason for someone to sit there silently. The lack of leaves offered no concealment. A hunter would be visible to anyone at the overlook, and there did not appear to be a platform or ladder. We also saw no firearm, backpack straps, or normal human movement. Still, a person in unusual gear is more likely than an unknown winged animal. Perhaps someone was maintaining the area, studying birds, or climbing for sport. At that distance, the activity would be impossible to identify. A damaged branch or old nest could explain everything without any living creature at all. Large nests can contain sticks, plastic, fabric, and other material. A dark mass in the center with long branches hanging behind could resemble a crouched body with wings. Wind might move it slightly enough to make it seem alive. But I remember seeing legs. I remember the feeling that it was balanced on the branch rather than built into it. My friend remembered the same basic shape. Memory may have made those details clearer over time. The sighting did not last only a fraction of a second. We watched it for long enough to become frightened and decide to leave. That should have given us time to recognize a nest or broken tree limb. Instead, the longer we watched, the more convinced we became that it was a living thing. It is possible that fear prevented careful observation. Once I thought the figure could see us, I stopped analyzing it calmly. My attention shifted from identification to escape. My friend moved closer, but she may have been equally frightened and trying to confirm what her mind had already decided. Neither of us used binoculars or a camera. We did not move to another position to change the angle. We did not return the next day and inspect the tree. Those actions might have answered everything. At the time, leaving felt more important than solving the mystery. I sometimes regret not looking back after we reached the trail. If the creature had remained in the same position, that might suggest a nest or branch. If it had disappeared, we would know something living had moved, but even that would not identify it. A bird could easily fly away while we were walking. Returning with better equipment might have revealed a normal animal. Instead, the experience remained exactly as it occurred. A dark shape in a high tree, seen at a distance by two frightened people. We never told anyone else. We expected people to laugh. The story sounded like a cryptid encounter or something copied from the internet. Two friends hike to a canyon in Missouri and see a large winged creature in a dead tree. Without photographs or evidence, there was no way to make it sound convincing. We also did not want other people to influence the memory. Once someone gives a creature a name, the original details can begin changing to match the legend. We might start remembering glowing eyes, a human face, or a huge wingspan, even though we never saw those things. So we kept the description simple between us. It was dark. It was crouched. It had legs. It had long wings down its back. That was all. We did not claim it flew. We never saw the wings open. We did not hear it call. It did not chase us. It may not have noticed us at all. The fear came from what it appeared capable of doing, not from anything it actually did. I think that silence is one reason the encounter stayed vivid. My friend and I both made the same decision without discussing it. At the overlook, neither of us named the creature. On the walk back, neither of us mentioned it. In the car, we remained quiet. Only inside her house did we compare what we had seen. Her words completed my sentence. It had wings. That independent confirmation is the detail I cannot dismiss. If I had said, "Did you see the winged thing?" then her agreement might have been influenced by my description. Instead, she supplied the most unusual feature before I did. She had been looking at the same long shapes and reaching the same conclusion. This does not mean those shapes were truly wings. It means the illusion, if it was one, was strong enough to affect both of us in the same way. The location made the experience more intense. The creature was across a canyon, high in a dead tree, with the river and woods below it. It occupied a place that would be difficult for us to reach and dangerous to investigate. There was no easy way to walk closer. We would have needed to return to the rough path, descend through summer vegetation, cross or follow the river, and climb the opposite side. By then, the figure could be gone. The canyon protected the mystery. It gave us a clear view, but denied us any way to confirm what we saw. I have wondered whether someone else has reported unusual animals in that area. Large birds sometimes remain near rivers because of fish and open hunting space. An uncommon species passing through Missouri could surprise hikers who were unfamiliar with it. An escaped exotic bird might also appear completely out of place. A large stork, crane, or captive bird with clipped or damaged feathers could look strange enough to inspire the description we gave. That is much more likely than an undiscovered flying primate. The monkey-like impression may have come from posture alone. Many birds crouch low and pull their necks in, making the body look rounded and mammalian. Folded wings can extend far below the perch. If the head was turned away or hidden, there would be no beak to identify it. A bird resting in the sun could also remain almost completely still. I accept that as the best explanation. But whenever I imagine a heron or vulture in the tree, the shape still does not match my memory. The legs seemed thicker. The body seemed too solid. The folded wings appeared long and separate, like two dark panels extending down the back. That may be memory-resisting correction. Once an event becomes frightening, the original image is preserved more strongly than later reasoning. I do not trust the exact size anymore. I do not know how high the branch was or how far away the tree stood. I cannot say whether the creature had fur, feathers, or skin. I never saw its face. I also cannot say it was paranormal. All I know is that two people looked across the canyon and saw a shape neither could identify. We were both afraid to speak while it was present. That instinct still interests me. Why did silence feel safer? Perhaps we feared a normal wild animal would notice us if we shouted. Maybe we unconsciously understood that distance was our only protection. Or perhaps the scene felt so unreal that language seemed dangerous. Naming it would force us to accept that it existed. As long as the creature remained unspoken, we could leave and decide later what we believed. That is exactly what we did. We returned to the car without running. We waited until the trail, canyon, and tree were far behind us. Then I began one cautious sentence. So there was something in that tree, and my friend did not need me to finish. It had wings. Years later, I still return to that moment more than the sighting itself. The creature could have been a bird. The shape could have been branches. Our size estimates could have been completely wrong. But neither of us had planted the idea in the other person's mind. We saw the same impossible-looking silhouette and kept quiet for the same reason. Something was crouched in that tall, leafless tree above a Missouri canyon. It had visible legs. Two long shapes rested down its back, and both of us were afraid that if it realized we had seen it, the distance between the tree and the overlook might not matter.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.